Okay, I have some, if you have any questions, would you go to the center microphone, please, and speak your questions in? On the first talk, I should have left time for questions, but if you have anything you'd like to ask or say, would you please go to the center microphone and do that now? Yeah.
Father, I appreciated your talk very much. Just want to seek a clarification. You made a point with regard to the guilt, and perhaps I understood maybe wrongly that the sense of guilt doesn't have a kind of a salutary or healing role to play in the growth of a personality. I heard you saying that the guilt perhaps doesn't help so much not to have the sense of guilt, but think in terms of sick and a well person. So please may I ask you whether the sense of guilt doesn't have any saving role to play in our life?
I think there's a nice, very nice article on guilt that was at least put in my folder. And it talks about the three kinds of guilt. There's real guilt, and that forces you to change, to apologize, to do something to make up for the guilt. Then there is irrational guilt. It's a guilt complex where you feel guilty for everything. You feel guilty for the things that were all right, and that is the problem. Where you feel a guilt complex. You feel guilt. I remember at one time a lady said that a nun came into her in third grade, I guess she was, and said some boys wrote on the boys' bathroom wall some dirty words. She said, I wouldn't have known what those words were, and I wasn't in the boys' bathroom, but I felt guilty. And there are people that interiorize guilt for everything that happens. They take it upon themselves, and that's the kind of guilt that imprisons us. But real guilt, as you say, forces you to do something about it, to change, to apologize, and then leave it go. The only real mistake is the one from which you learn nothing. And I want to say that one of the girls, I have my students write a faith journal for me, and she said, instead of leaving my mistakes in the past and moving on from them, I rehearse them. And I go, oh, God, I do the same thing. It keeps you from loving yourself. But the real guilt, I think, yes, you should do something about and then leave it go. Let it go. Someone once said, with God, your wasness doesn't matter if your isness really am. Don't try to parse that, please. But it's true that with God, your wasness doesn't matter if your isness really am. Are there other questions? Other statements?
From your studies and personal counseling, from my experience in dealing with people, it's hard to change attitudes. Let's say a person experiences a separation or divorce or loss of a loved one, then you're growing up, you have all these experiences, positive and negatives. My underlying question is, does it take a long time to change the attitudes, even with those 6 means you gave us, or can these attitudes be changed in a month, a week, a day, a year? Are we talking long term before attitudes which have taken roots to change?
Yeah. Usually, psychologically, it does take a long time for attitudes to change. You have to use those counter logics. You have to use the modeling, the stretching, and the praying very often. Sometimes, God doesn't read all of our books. Sometimes one religious experience can really change a person. I remember a girl that came to me and lost her faith, and I was talking to her for about an hour and a half, and I know that all I can do is explain what faith is, but I was hoping she would take it in. But as she's leaving, she said, if faith is what you say it is, I don't want any part of it. And I felt my stomach go clunk. And that night, the person who sent her to me called up and said, you're a miracle worker. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, well, I saw her tonight, and she's very different. I said, she is? What happened? I said, would you have her call me? She said, I don't know, but it's something you said. And I said, well, the last thing she said to me was she wanted no part of what I said. And I said, would you have her call me? Because there's a little discrepancy between what you saw and what I heard. And the girl called up, and she said, yeah, when I left you, that's the way I felt, but I crossed Sheridan, you don't know these streets, the Sheridan Road in Chicago, and got on the elevated train steps, and then it hit me. It was all true. And sometimes one religious experience can really turn a person's whole life around. So there isn't a timetable for a change in attitudes, because religious experience sometimes changes a person immediately. And sometimes it takes a long time. As Jared Manley Hopkins says in his poem, The Wreck of the Deutschland, with the anvil ding and the fire in him, forge thy will, O God, or rather stealing through me a springtime, melt me but master me still. And then he says, out of us, as a once crashed Paul, if you have to knock me down like you knocked down St. Paul and convert me, do that. Or a lingering out sweet skill as with Austin, and Austin is a contraction for Augustine. If you're going to win me over 30 years, too late have I loved you, then do it that way. But all I ask is that you be my master in the end. And so sometimes it does take a long time, and sometimes it takes just a short time. But you never know, because God doesn't read our books. Okay? Okay. What I want to talk about in this second talk is the attitude we have towards others. I think that is probably the second most important attitude in our repertoire of attitudes that exist up in our mind. Remember, there are thousands of attitudes in our mind. The ones that need reformation are going to cause us some trouble. They're going to keep coming back to us and make life unpleasant, make life difficult. The Talmud says that everybody will be called to account for the legitimate pleasures that he or she failed to enjoy. And I think of that, wow, can you imagine that? Or as a priest met Groucho Marx in the street one day, and he said, excuse me, aren't you Groucho Marx? He said, I am, Father, yes. And he said, well, I just want to thank you for the joy you've brought into life, into people's lives. And he said, and I want to thank you, Father, for all the joy you've taken out of people's lives. So I think our attitude toward others is extremely important. And one teacher once gave his assignment to a class to go out and find a wildflower and that would grow by the side of the road, that no one would have noticed otherwise, and turn it in the sunlight and see the veins in its leaves and see the blossoms and so forth. And then you begin to appreciate that little wildflower. Now, he said, people are like that. People are like that. You have to turn them in the sunlight. You have to see them from different angles, different facets of the personality, and then you begin to see the beauty of them. But I know a priest who says, I will bet everything I own, he doesn't own much, but he wants to bet it anyway, that at the bottom of every rift between two people is a judgment. And when he first said that, I wanted to question that. And the more I think about it, the more I think it's really true. That it's a judgment. If I thought you were insane, I don't think I would make I wouldn't make any judgment of you except that you're insane. But I wouldn't take what you said personally if I thought you were insane. But if I assume you are sane and you're out to get me and so forth, then I can get really upset about it. And I really think it's true that at the bottom of every rift between any two people is a judgment. The bottom line of criticism is almost always a judgment and assumption. Now, Thomas Merton once gave a reflection to his community, the Trappist monastery at Gethsemane, and on communication. And he said, what is communication? And he said, it's something we have in common. What do we have in common? We have your person and my person in human communication. You know me and I know you. But what we communicate is our person to each other. And sometimes I think these judgments are made to fill in what we really don't know about the other person. Someone once said that communication is like a cylinder, and what's communicated directly and with shared meaning, what do you hear me just say? They feed it back to you, can be assumed that I have communicated. But around the edge is embroidered a whole history of imagination. I imagine because you looked at me a certain way that you didn't like me. Oh, wow. I've got to ask you about that. But at any rate, I think people are far too complicated to ever judge anybody. When people come to confession to me and they recite a list of sins, I say, well, insofar as you need God's forgiveness, I give it to you, but I don't know how much they need it. I don't know how much I need it. I don't know how much you need it. But I think that to make a fast and hard judgment. Now, can you judge a person's actions? I think, oh, yeah. If you steal from me or you lie to me, and I say, well, that was a lie. Well, but maybe it wasn't a lie for you. Maybe it wasn't stealing for you. Maybe it was something else for you. I can't judge a person, but I can judge an action. Last year, I talked to the group on the right to life. I can judge an action. An abortion is a taking of an innocent human life. There's no question in my mind about that. And there's no medical textbook in any medical school in this country that teaches otherwise. They all teach that human life begins at conception. And in 1970, a group of California doctors wrote that we all know life begins at conception and lasts until natural death. We all know that, except Harry Blackman. He doesn't know that, and Bill Clinton doesn't know that. They both have said that we don't know when human life begins, but they do know when human life begins. The saintly Mother Teresa said, if I were ruling this world, I would build a big building and put all the doctors in it to perform abortions because they know what they're doing. They know they're killing. But at any rate, you can judge an action, but you can't judge a person. I don't know. I don't know about the person. Maybe the person was too scared, too terrified, saw it as the only way out. But I really do think that they say that everything that has ever happened to a person is stored on the human brain. Everything, the prenatal, the natal experiences, everything is stored up there on the human brain. And that and some of it makes us insecure and some of it makes us secure. And I don't know what's on your brain. When you come to me, all I can say is, I have no idea. But I know I can't judge you. They say that there are quadrillions of messages and memories stored on every human brain. Quadrillions. And I don't know what's stored in your brain. You don't know what's stored in my brain. I don't know what's in my brain. You don't know what's in your brain. What a stupid thing it is for us to judge each other. So I can't judge you, but I can judge actions. I can't say this is wrong, that's wrong, but the person who does that, I can't judge. Someone once said that if they ever build a computer that can store all that the human brain, your brain and my brain right now is storing, it will be 10 stories tall and cover the state of Texas. Imagine a 10-story tall computer covering the state of Texas. They talk about the Texan who went to Australia. And they showed him a herd of cattle, and he said, I got more meat than that in my freezer. And everything is big in Texas, right? And they showed him the Pacific Ocean. He said, that's about the size of the swimming pool in my backyard. And with that, a kangaroo bounded out of one of the bushes. He said, what in tarnation is that? And the Australian said, don't you have grasshoppers in Texas? Also, I think it's true that whatever we act out, whatever is acted out on you, whatever you and I act out, probably most often, unless our adult is really in charge of our personality, is something from the past. The more I see of that, the more I realize that's really true. I had a good-looking boy in class. His face was very nice looking, but he always had a constipated look on his face. And one day he came in to talk to me, and I said, Billy, you have a nice face. But I said, that look on your face is awful. And he said, I know. I said, what is it about? I don't know. And they always say, I don't know. And I said, well, tell me about your childhood. What was it like? And he said, well, I'm adopted. And I assumed, no, they never told me this, but I assumed that if I ever displeased either of my adoptive parents, I was going back to the orphanage. And the only person I knew that really loved me, that really wanted me around, was my adoptive grandmother. And she died when I was 6. And I thought, that's the perfect caption for that face that I've had to look at every day in class, a terrible look on his face. Am I going back to the orphanage? He was acting out something from his past. Another boy came in to see me, was very suspicious of his girlfriend all the time. And I said, are your parents married? He said, well, they're divorced. And I said, why were they divorced? He said, my father was untrue to my mother. I said, how did you know that? He said, my mother told me. I said, do you think that could have anything to do with your suspicion of your girlfriend? You want to know whether she was from 11:30 to 11:45? And the first he said no, and then finally one day he came in and he said, yeah, that's it. So I think we do act out things from our past. Unless we can gradually assert the adult and act against the emotions of the past, we think people are out to get us, or we think something else. So we can't judge one another. And if you find a tendency to say, I know why you did that, I know what that look means, you're going to be wrong. You can be wrong if you want to join me. I've been wrong so many times. But you're going to be wrong. There's something else that's in that person's life. And I've seen that happen so often. I gave a camera one time to a man. I said, would you take a picture of me and your kids? And the kids wouldn't pose. They were a little antsy. And finally he gave the camera back to me. And he said, no, I can't take a picture. And I said, why can't you take the picture? He said, I don't know. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, well, I'm a depression kid, and I didn't want to waste any of your film. He was acting out something from his past in the present. He was a depression kid, and he didn't want to waste one of the films. Oh, that's it. But I see this so often that something in the past always explains something in the present. I was telling someone at breakfast this morning that one of the kids in my class exploded at me one day. And he said, I was talking about delusion, and I said, we're all deluded to some extent. And he said, well, the church has deluded us, and you've deluded us. And I said, well, start me out on something small. Maybe we can talk about it. And he wouldn't talk about it. He said, the church has said that certain things were right. Now they're saying they're wrong. Certain things were wrong, and now they're right, and you don't know what to believe. And I have these students of mine write faith journals. And this boy wrote that his father was an Episcopal priest. And he said, I never was close to my father. And he said, I wrote a letter to him, and I said, I always wanted to be close to you, but I never have been, because my mother always interposed herself between me and my father. And I asked him if he gave that letter to his father, and he said no. And I said, would you please do that? Unless you're going to judge him or something. But if you're just telling him how you feel, would you please give that letter to your father? And he said he would, and I don't know if he ever did or not. But he also wrote, I was the kind of kid you like to beat up. And so I took my beating every day after school and went home, and I thought, oh, no wonder he exploded in class. No wonder he's so angry. Can you imagine getting beat up every day after school and going home? Oh. So something in the past influences people in the present. Our yesterdays lie heavily upon our todays, and our todays upon our tomorrows. So when a person comes into our lives, one thing I know is you can't judge that person. Maybe something happened. Remember this story about pain in a person's life? I was teaching, first 7 years of my teaching was in a seminary. And some parents brought an alcoholic young girl to see me, their daughter. And the father came in and said, is there a kid, you want to hear her latest? And I said, no, not from you. And so we sat down, and she told me her latest. Wow. She said, I drank a bottle of vodka right down. I chugged a bottle of vodka. I said, what happened? She said, I don't know. She said, I went out. That's a southern Indiana dialect. And they had to get a doctor to revive me. And I said, oh. And anyway, she said, can I come back to see you? And I said, yeah, you can, if you want to. And she said, I want to. And I thought, wow, I made a convert. I mean, she's open to it. And then every time she came, I liked her less, because she was the most self-centered little creature I've ever met. And one day she said, I'm going to get him. Oh, I'm going to get him. I'm going to get even with him if it's the last thing I do. And I said, who? Who hurt you? And she said, my mother and father. They wouldn't let me use the family car to go to the Rustic Friday night, Saturday night. And the Rustic is a dive in southern Indiana. And so I said, oh, why wouldn't they let you go? I told you I don't know. And I said, well, maybe we could think of a reason. She said, I told you I don't know. And I said, maybe that's why I said maybe we could think of a reason. Maybe they love you. And so, shit, they don't love me. And I said, maybe they do. If you were my daughter, I wouldn't want you at the rustic. And I was trying to think, how do you get this kid out of this little world she's in? So I said, do you know there are people that are going through the garbage cans of life to find the food to stay alive? Do you know that? Do you know that there are people with a demon in their guts called cancer that's eating them away, and they're twisting and turning in pain, and they're sweating, and no one cares because they're just a number? And she said, name 2. And she walked out. And I thought, oh, she's walking out of my life. And all I could say was, please think about it. So this psychiatrist, the man that I think I learned a lot from, John Nurnberger, used to be head of the Department of Psychiatry at Indiana University, came to talk to the seminarians. And after the talk, being on the faculty, naturally I had access to the infirmary where we kept beer for medical reasons only. And so I took him up to the infirmary, and I said, could I get a little free advice from you? And I said, and he was the one who told me about the pain and the toothaches. And he said, this kid that you're telling me about, you know, when she drank that bottle of vodka right down, she was trying to kill herself. And when the doctor injected her with whatever they inject you with to revive you, she was saying deep down inside of herself, well, let me die. Please don't make me come back. And what she doesn't want to come back to is herself. She doesn't want to come back to her life, so you did her great harm. And I said, I did her great harm? Yeah, I said, you agreed with her father. You said, I don't like you either. And I said, I said that? And he said, well, you said it equivalently. When you told her she needed a Copernican revolution, you need to find out the whole world doesn't revolve around her. She's supposed to revolve around the world. Well, do you have to add, I don't like you? So I wrote to the girl and I said, please come back. I have one more thing I want to say to you that's very important. And so she did come back, and so I put my arms around her in the seminary door, and she said, what does this mean? And I said, well, what does it mean when someone hugs you? They like you. And she said, you don't like me. And I said, give me another chance, will you? So eventually she came back, and we resumed our visits, and she became a different person. But she didn't change immediately, but I changed because I knew that it's love that recovers people. And I had been judging her and thinking all sorts of dire things about her, and you can't. You got to ask, what is it like to be you? So I think the real step toward loving other people is what's called empathy. Now, no one ever talks about empathy that I know of. Sympathy is when you feel sorry for a person. It runs the risk of looking down on the person. I feel sorry for you, you poor slob. But empathy enters into whatever the other person is feeling. If you're feeling good, if you want me to clap, I'll clap. If you had a success, then I rejoice with you. But I try to walk in your moccasins for a mile before ever I deal with you. And I keep thinking about what empathy does. What is it like to be, empathy asks this question, what is it like to be you? And it's not like what it's like to be me. Because we're different, we come out of different backgrounds, we have different attitudes that shape our lives. I remember one night there was a boy at our school, he's graduated now, who was homosexual and suicidal. And he called me up one night, and he had a quavering voice, and he said, are you going to be in tonight? And they say that a good counselor doesn't pay attention to the words people use, but to the way they say them. And because his voice was quavering, he sounded very frightened. I said, yes, I'm waiting for you. So he came up the stairs that lead to my office, and he's pacing back and forth in my little office, and I was in my swivel chair trying to follow him. And finally he sat down after he worked off his nervous tension. I said, what is it like? What is it like to be you? I've never been suicidal or homosexual. But I want to know what it's like for you. Now, not what it's like for everybody. What is it like for you? And he said, excuse me for saying this, but he said, it's shitty. It really is. He said, you wake up in the morning, you look at yourself in the mirror, and you hate yourself. And I have to pretend that I'm not. And my father said I'd rather have a dead son than a fag in my family. And for an hour and 15 minutes, the kid talked. And all I did was ask him questions. How long have you felt that way? Oh, my God. And what is suicide like? Do you feel like death is stalking you, like you're in a room and there's only one door out of the room and that's death? Do you feel that way? And he talked himself out for an hour and 15 minutes, and he stood up. And he said, you know, when I came up the stairs to your office, you know how I felt like, what I felt like? I felt like Humpty Dumpty. I felt like all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put me back together again. And he smiled. And the first time I ever saw him smile. And he said, you know, but I do feel put back together again now. And he walked out. And he's gone nothing but up since then. And I think, what was that? What happened there? I didn't offer him any advice. I have no advice. Offered him empathy. What is it like to be you? Tell me what it's like to be you. And I made time for him. I gave him my undivided attention. What is it like? And it's healing. Empathy is healing, but it's the first step to loving a person, to knowing what a person needs, is to walk a mile in their moccasins first and then decide what they need. You all know about Marilyn Monroe. You know, when her father fathered her, he was an itinerant bread baker. Her name was Norma Jean Baker, but that was a coincidence. But he fathered Norma Jean, and then he left the mother. And the mother was insane. And she spent time in mental institutions. And whenever she went to a mental institution, Marilyn went to Norma Jean went to a foster home. And one day in a foster home, when she was 8 years old, a man raped her, a boarder raped her, and gave her a nickel and said, here, honey, so you won't tell me what I just did to you. And she told the foster mother, he raped me. And the foster mother whipped her and said, don't you ever say anything like that about our boarders. You know, they pay rent here, and that's more than you do. And so she got married at 16. But all the time she's saying, would someone take me seriously? Would someone please listen to me? And no one ever did. And that marriage didn't work out. Then she went to Hollywood, and they said, oh, you're going to be a sex symbol. And Marilyn Monroe honestly said, aren't symbols things you hit together? Oh, they said, honey, you got a brain of blue cheese, but it's all right, because we'll do the hype. And all the time she's saying, and I'm sure that's why she married Joe DiMaggio, and I'm sure that's why she married Arthur Miller, because she just wanted someone to listen to her, to take her seriously. I want to play serious roles. And no one ever would. At 35, Marilyn Monroe, there are a lot of stories about her death, but the one that seems to be verified is that her death was caused by an overdose of sleeping pills. She just an overdose. And she called up a male companion, and she said, I've taken this overdose of sleeping pills, and the words of Rhett Butler, he said, I don't give a damn. That's your problem. That's not mine. And she died. And she threw the phone, after she talked to him, off the hook. It landed on the floor. And when her maid found her corpse the next morning, she found the phone off the floor and the dead body of Marilyn in bed. And then the whole nation did an act of contrition, a corporate act of contrition. Who killed Marilyn, they said. Well, we all did. Everybody in Hollywood hated that woman because she was known as the prima donna, who would swish in with her furs the last minute, and the producers would have to pay the extras. They'd have to pay the electricians, all the set people, because the prima donna isn't here yet. But what they didn't know, and they found out later, that she was home vomiting. She was scared stiff of a camera. Tony Curtis once said, do you think it's fun kissing Marilyn Monroe? Did you ever kiss someone who just vomited? And when she first came to Hollywood, she was Shelley Winters' roommate. And Shelley Winters said, my family is coming this weekend to visit me. Oh, it's going to be terrible. And Marilyn Monroe said to her in that plaintive voice of hers, I wish someone were coming to visit me. I wish I had a family that would come and visit me, that was that interested in me. But Claire Booth Luce wrote an article Claire Booth Luce's husband, Henry Luce, started the old Time and Life magazines. And Claire Booth Luce wrote an article on Marilyn Monroe in the old Life magazine called Marilyn Monroe, the Goddess of Love, Who Never Found Any Love. And she said, I think the symbol of her life was that phone off the hook. She wanted someone to listen to her, and no one ever would. And Claire Booth Luce says in the article, and I think that is the symbol of many lives. They want someone to listen, to understand, not to judge, not to jump in with a judgment, not to jump in with advice, because advice always runs the risk of saying, I don't like you the way you are, you got to change. But just listen. And she threw the phone off the hook and she said, I don't care. And she died on a Saturday night when she was 35 years old. So it seems to me, at least, that empathy is the key to loving people, is the key to understanding them. I don't judge you. I don't come at you armed with judgments, but with simple empathy. Carl Rogers, you all know who Carl Rogers is. He's the counselor that revolutionized counseling. You got new ball bearings put in your neck every Christmas. But all you say, And Carl Rogers said we're all like a man or a woman who's fallen into a deep, dry well, and we can't crawl out. And we call up for help, 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 and no one's coming. And hope begins to grow gray hairs. And we think, oh, I'm going to die here. And then someone comes to the top of the well and says, we know you're down there. We're going to drop a rope ladder. We're going to save your life. And she said, and Rogers says, there's an explosion of joy in the person trapped in the deep, dry well. Someone, thank God, he said, someone finally knows that I'm here. And when someone really listens to you, and someone is really truly empathic, you have the same explosion of joy. Oh, thank God. Someone finally knows what it's like to be me. Someone finally knows. Because that's the question empathy asks. What is it like to be you? It's not like what it's like to be me. What is it like to be you? And to be truly interested in that person and to truly be empathic is the important step toward breaking the fixation with yourself. How much time is this person going to take? How long is this person going to want me? Oh, God, what has this person got in mind? But what is it like to be you? And I offer you the examples that I have to urge you to be more empathic, to try to stretch in that direction. What is it like to be you? And I can't judge you, and I don't judge you. But I want to understand you. I want to know who you are. In the Mertonian sense, I want to know what it's like to be you. I really want to communicate. Charles Péguy said, if we try to go to God alone, he's going to ask us an embarrassing question. And the embarrassing question is, where are your brothers and sisters? You didn't come alone, did you? You didn't bring them? That somehow the kingdom of God, as I understand it in the New Testament, is an invitation to all of us to come as a people to God, not as individuals. There's an individual element in our response to God, but there's also a people element. And I think Péguy is right, that if we try to go to God alone, we say, I kept all your commandments, I did everything I was supposed to do, here I am. God will ask you an embarrassing question. Didn't you bring your brothers and sisters? They're not with you? Where are they? I think that's what the kingdom of God means, that on the part of God, it's God saying, I love you. Will you come to me? And when we pray, thy kingdom come, and Michel Quast says in his book, Prayers, Lord, help me to say yes. Yes to the kingdom. He says, not the big yes. It's not the yes with the flowers on the altar and music in the air. It's the little yeses that begin on Monday morning. Help me to say yes. Yes to your kingdom. Yes to loving. So the kingdom of God has a horizontal and a vertical aspect to it. And the vertical aspect is the going to God. And for many of us, that's not difficult. But as the Irish ditty goes, to live above with the saints we love, that is the purest glory. But to live below with the saints we know, that is another story. The kingdom of God has a horizontal dimension too. In other words, I can't say I love God unless I love you also. And Jesus says, if you come and lay your gift at the altar, the bread and the wine symbolize all that we are and have, past, present, and future. If you come to lay your gift on the altar, and you remember something you've got against your brother, you remember some grudge you're nourishing inside you, go out and straighten that out first. And then come and lay your gift at the altar. Then I'm ready for your gift. And I used to think about that. What does that mean? And that's the kingdom of God in action. You've got to love everybody. I remember I said that in a wedding homily once. You've got to love everybody. About 25 people took me on at the reception later, and they said, you can't love everybody. And I said, well, you can't like everybody. You can't be attracted to everybody. But you can love everybody. You can. It all depends on how you define love. Jesus says, you love your friends? Oh, come on. Love your enemies. And he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. It's the Samaritan who helps the fallen Jew. And they didn't even talk to each other. And Jesus said, you go do likewise. Help the people that are not nice to you, the people that are angry. Because it's the pain of their past lives. It's not the pain that's directed to you. Kubler-Ross, in her research on death and dying people, said that the dying people very often yell at the doctor or the nurse. What are you trying to do, inject me with a square needle? Were you on time for your own wedding? How come you're not on time for me? And he said what they're really objecting to is the fact that they're dying. I'm going to die. I'm not going to raise my kids, and you are. You're going to go on living. That's unfair. And they're in the angry stage of resentment. But they're not, they don't. And she said, unfortunately, many doctors and nurses take this personally. They think that anger is really directed toward them. And I think, oh, that's such a mistake to think that anger is directed toward you. I think I schooled myself that the people in my class, if they're angry about something, it's not directed toward me. That I am personally responsible. There's something in me that reacts. And what's in me is understanding and empathy. You must have been hurt. I take pictures of my class the first day of class with a Polaroid camera. And I line them up, 3 sitting down, 3 standing behind them, and I make them sign in order. So I know all the names and all the faces the second day of class. There were 40 kids in each class. So I'm standing in front of this boy the second day of class, which I have announced that I know all the names. And I say, Ray, what do you think about that? What we're talking about? What do you think about it? And he gives me a Mona Lisa look. And I say, Ray, you know what we're talking about. I want to know what you think about this. And I get the same Mona Lisa look. And I said, either your name isn't Ray or you're not thinking about it. And I went back to my list because I knew his last name. It was Bill. And I said, oh, excuse me, it's Bill, isn't it? And he said, oh, were you talking to me? And right on the edge of my tongue was the words, oh, you little worm, you knew I was talking to you. I was standing right in front of you, looking right at you. You knew it. But I said to myself, the kid has been hurt. Somebody back there in his life hurt him. I don't know. He had acne on his face. He was small physically. Someone kicked sand in his face somewhere. So I said, oh, yeah, I did. I was calling on you, but I'm sorry. I had the wrong handle, but I won't do it again. And I say to myself, is that being honest? When you don't like somebody, should you tell them I feel like punching you in the nose? And I say, no, I'm being honest. That's my higher self. That's my adult self that's acting. And when I say I had the wrong handle, I took the blame. Yeah. That's not being dishonest. I have to let that emotion out to somebody. There was a kid, like I'm letting out to you. There was a kid in my class. I wanted to say, you little worm, you know I was talking to you. But I won't say it to him. Because hurting him again isn't going to do any good. It's only going to cause that problem to fester more and more. So the kingdom of God has a rough side to it. And sometimes love is tender, and sometimes love is tough. And you got to decide, and you got to weigh your needs, because you got to love yourself, you got to love your neighbor, you got to love your God. But other people are very important in your attitudes. Sometime I would like to ask you to write down just the things that come most quickly to your mind. Just fill in this sentence. Other people are what? Other people are what? Other people are generous, good, bad, selfish, self-centered. I think the adjective, maybe this will prejudice you, but I think the adjective that we should supply is needy. Everybody's needy. Everybody that comes into your life and into my life is a needy person. And if you can just afford a little smile, a little kind word, and so forth. Art Buchwald tells a story about the taxi cab driver in New York City. And he said, this friend of his said he's going to convert all of New York City. Oh, he said, you're not going to do that. You can't convert New York. He said, yeah, it's real simple. All you have to do is affirm people. You make them feel like they're worth something. So they got in a cab, and the cab was weaving in and out of traffic. And as they got out, the friend said to the cab driver, "Sir, you are the best driver I've ever driven with. If you had one more coat of paint, you would have hit some of those other cars." And the cab driver says, "What are you, mister? Some kind of nut?" And he said, No, I'm very serious. You are one great driver." So the cab driver pulled away slowly, and he had a smile on his face. And the friend said to Art Buchwald, "See what I mean?" And the two men are walking along, and they pass a woman. And he said, "Did you wink at her?" He asked his friend, and he said, "Yes." He said, "She was a very ordinary-looking woman. Why did you wink at her?" He said, "It's part of the program." He said, "All I know is if she's a school teacher, her class is going to have a great day." So your attitude toward others, and you get in touch with by writing down the fill-in test, others are what? In my experience, others are what? Others are needy. Others need my affirmation. I was telling a class that I teach about affirmation. The miracle of affirmation, of affirming people, even if it's just that your hair is parted straight, just tell them that. And one of the girls was out teaching, and she said this boy came to class every day and his hair looked like it was a bird's nest. But on class photograph day, he had his hair combed. And she said, "Oh, Gregory," she said, "I hope you have your track shoes on." And he said, "Why?" She said, "Because the girls are going to chase you all over this place. I didn't know you were so good looking until you combed your hair." And every day after that, he had his hair combed. She said, "It works." If you affirm people, if you get that idea, you can't judge people, and you affirm them, you lift them up. You raise their self-image by giving them belief in themselves. I remember there was, as a teacher, I watched for the kids who were sick, and also, in the spirit of Abraham Maslow, for the kids who were very well. And this girl was very well. She was well-adjusted. She was very... And one day I called on her in class. She wasn't too bright, but she was very well-adjusted. And I called on her in class, and she said, "Wait a minute, I think something is coming. Wait a minute." Sorry, nothing. And she says, "When you call on the smart kids in this class, you know what I think is happening? A little man is on a motorcycle going through stacks of books, and he screeches to a halt. And he takes down a big fat volume, looks up the answer, and out it comes. When you call on me, there's a little man with a green visor over his head and 7 cards in a file box and a 25-watt bulb. And he says, "Blip, blip, blip, not here. Sorry." And I thought, wow, are you well-adjusted? And one day she brought in a banjo in a case. And I said, "Noreen, do you play the banjo?" And she said, "Not very well, I'm just learning. But I can play the first 9 bars of MAME." So the class started clapping. They wanted to hear her play. And she said, "Do you want to hear the first 9 bars of MAME?" And they said, "Yes." So she played the first 9 bars of MAME, put the banjo back in the box, and sat down. I was amazed. She was truthful. She told me the truth. I can play the first 9 bars of MAME. That's what she played for him. So I said to her one day, she's walking in our class, "How did you get so well?" She said, "Oh, it's my parents. You should come over to our house sometime." Now brace yourself for this, okay? There's 17 kids in this family. When the mother got pregnant again, neighbors would say to her, "Are you pregnant again?" And she'd say, "No, I'm just putting on the old front." But she said, "Would you like to meet my family?" And I said, "Oh, I'd love to meet your family." And so when I came in, it was a New Year's Eve party. When I came in, the father said, "Hey, everybody, look who's here." And I thought, boy, they're really going to roll out the red carpet for me, aren't they? And then the next person was little nun. He said, "Hey, everybody, look who's here. It's Sister Mary of the Tabernacle Light," I thought, he's going to do that for everybody, isn't he? And affirmation just ran rampant in that family. The affirming of everybody else. I remember saying to a boy, it was in high school, and a member of the family, "I heard you won a swimming championship in the Park District." He said, "I did, Father, but this kid," he had a little 4-year-old brother sitting on his lap with 17 kids, there's not enough chairs. And he said, "But this kid's going to be our swimmer." And I looked up in the little 4-year-old face and said, "Is that right?" He said, "Mm-hmm. He's going to be the swimmer." And so when I was leaving, I said to the parents at the door, "You've done something right. I don't know what you've done, but there's something right." Well, he said, "We don't have much money." And he said, "We're 17 kids, you got to rent a station wagon, go to Mass on Sunday." But I keep telling those kids, we are the riches in this family. We are the riches, not what we have. We are the riches. And I keep stressing that through affirmation. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really true. I'm reminded of what Lillian Roth, I've been given credit for this, and I like to publicly abdicate all credit. But I was reading the life of Lillian Roth called "I'll Cry Tomorrow." And Lillian Roth was a singer and a dancer and a movie star of years past. And she fell into narcotic addiction, into alcoholism, and she was married several times. But I mean, she straightened up. And everything was fine in her life, and she was out of the addictions. And they asked her, how did this happen? Oh, she said, simple, "I found someone who loved me." And then she quotes, "Our lives are shaped by those who love us." And I added, "and those who refuse to love us." Our lives are shaped by those who love us and those who refuse to love us. I see that quotation over my name, and I want to say, no, I don't deserve that. Lillian Roth said that. But I think that it is true that sometimes love is tough and sometimes it's tender. And I just want to say one last thing, that in the world of transactional analysis, a man invented transactional analysis, a fellow named Eric Berne, who was a California psychoanalyst. And he said, after you analyze people, you dredge out of their unconscious all the things that are down there. That's where people get troubled, He said 95% of it is garbage anyway. You can't use it. But if you can train people to get their adult in charge, and he said, you train people to listen carefully. Is your parent in charge? Are you quoting from a parent tape now, from something you've been told you should be, you should do, you must be, you must ought to do? Or are you acting out of your child? Your emotions are telling you what to do. And never let your emotions, never let your parents tell you what to do. You decide what you think the right thing to do is. To get your adult in charge is very difficult, because you got to ask yourself, did I do that because of emotions? Did I do that because of parent tapes? But it's very difficult to be honest with yourself and to say, my adult is in charge. I think this is the right thing to do. But in addition to that Irish ditty that I quoted about to live above with the saints we love, there's another one that goes this way. As you ramble through life, my brother, my sister, whatever be your goal, keep your eye upon the donut and not upon the hole. Thank you for listening. Do we have time for questions? Yes. Are there any questions, please? Anything I've said, anything you want to state, please come to the center microphone. First one is always the hardest. Yeah.
Can you, in a brief moment, explain what's transactional analysis?
Okay. In a brief moment, transactional analysis is so named because you can analyze every transaction that goes on. If the husband says to the wife, "Where are my cufflinks? I can't find them." Now he's acting like a child. My cufflinks. And she says, "Oh, go look for them yourself. You got to grow up someday." That's her. She's acting out of her parent. You analyze the ego state, the parent, adult, or child, that in every transaction, the husband or the wife or the parish priest or the parishioner is acting out of. And Eric Berne says it's for groups, transaction analysis for groups. And what you do is, and I'm not good at this, but you train people to listen. Is that your adult speaking, or is that your child speaking? And if it's your adult, you say, "Oh, the old witch is winning, the old witch is winning," or a baby's crying out now, huh? And until they get their adult in charge. And so you get your adult in charge, you get your own mind and your own will to make your decisions, and that's what you do. What you decide, what you think is the right thing. Not what other people think is the right thing to do. Not what you've been told or not what you feel like. But you decide what you're going to do. That's why I was saying before that if you don't like a person, you can still treat the person with love. You can still treat the person kindly. And is that being dishonest? No, it's not being dishonest. It's your adult in charge. And so that's what transactional analysis means. And a fellow named Tom Harris is a psychiatrist also, wrote a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay, and he analyzes, he puts Burns's BERNES' theory out for people like you and me to read about. I'm okay, you're okay. He said that's the only ego state to operate out of is the adult state. I once had a girl at school who had her child was always in charge. And she was so pathologically regressed, she even talked baby talk to me. Hiya, father, what's it that? And I say, Maureen, you're 21 years old. When are you going to start acting your age? And so she went away for 4 years, and she got a graduate degree. She was a very bright girl. And she came back and said, would you marry me? Would you perform my marriage? And I said, I usually say, who's the lucky guy? And I couldn't even say it. I said, whom are you marrying? And she said, a Protestant minister. And I said, does he really want to be married by a Catholic priest? And she said, yep, that's what he says. And I said, will you bring him around? Well, the fellow came around. He was Clem Cadiddlehopper. Hi, Father Paul, what do you say? You know, he just fell off the turnip truck. And so about 3 months later, she's back in my office after their honeymoon, after I performed the marriage. She's, by the way, an hour and a half late for the wedding. And I asked her, she said, okay, everybody, let's go, let's do it. And I said, oh, come on, I'm not ready to go. Where have you been? She said, I was at the beautician's, and the lady had some other lady in the hairdryer or something. I had to wait. But she had an excuse. But 3 months later, she's back in my office asking about an annulment. And I said, are you asking for yourself or for somebody else? She said, for me. He doesn't love me anymore. When did he tell you this? At the end of our honeymoon. He said he didn't love her anymore. And if I didn't divorce him, he would divorce me. And I said, on what grounds? He said, probably physical cruelty. I said, physical cruelty? You beat him up? And she said, well, I banged his head against the floor to try to get a little sense into him. And I said, Maureen, your child is in charge. Your child is in charge of your whole personality. You need help to get that adult in charge. And she said, I know now. And I'm sorry that I was so late. Are there any other questions? Any other statements? Yes, please.
Father Powell, you mentioned 12-step programs this morning. A very popular Catholic speaker says that all of us need a 12-step program because every one of us is addicted to some kind of sinful attitudes or behaviors. Should we take him literally, and what do you think of that statement?
Yeah. The question is the 12 steps for everybody, and I think yes. I once tried to make the 12 steps, and I'm not addicted to alcohol, but I said the first step is I'm powerless over what? I'm not powerless over anything. I said condescendingly, I'm making it. And then it began to tumble in me. I'm addicted to my emotions. I'm addicted to this. I'm addicted to that. Yes, I think that is an addiction. Something you got to do or you don't feel right about it. Ooh. There are addictions. There are so many of them. And then to turn your life over to God, the third step of the 12 steps, I think, oh, that is so hard. I wish you could do it once and for all, to leap out into the dark and say, I'm yours, God, here, take me. But you got to do it every day and every moment of every day, before every action, to turn your life over to God. All the outcomes are in your hands. But I think the 12 steps are for everybody, and I think you'll find out if you examine yourself what you're powerless over, what you're addicted to, because it will cause pain in your life. It will cause restrictions in your life. It'll paint you into a small corner of life, and then to turn your life over. There is a God who loves me and wants to help me, and to turn your life over to God. Yeah, I think 12 steps are for everybody. That's my impression. Okay? Do you have something to say, Andy? Oh, excuse me.
It's under the heading of affirmation. How do you avoid being insincere? In Ireland, they're very suspicious at times of people who have the gift of the blarney. They have a special word for it called plamos. And they say, well, you wear your heart on your sleeve. And in fact, in Ireland, very often they have the image of Americans, perhaps, who would slap you on the shoulder and say, "You're a great guy." They don't mean a word of it. Not reflection on anybody here or anything. But how do you avoid that pitfall of just not meaning what you say?
Yeah, this is a hard one. I think the search for authenticity is lifelong. I remember being out at Loyola's hospital and take a physical, and they put you through all the exams one week, and then a doctor reads the results the next week. And while he was reading the results, every time he knitted his eyebrows, I jumped into his lap. And once he said, "Uh-oh," and I said, "What?" And he said, "I can't read the other doctor's writing. Down, Fang." And so going home, I said to myself, driving home through the night, I said, I was nervous. What was I nervous about? I was nervous that he was going to tell me I had something terminally wrong. If I had a little rash or something that would disappear, that'd be all right. But not if I had a suspicious shadow in my lungs or in my brain or something. Yeah. And I thought, I'm afraid to die. I am afraid of death. I give great sermons on death, by the way. "Oh, death, where's your victory? Oh, death, where's your sting?" And then a pain hits me in the center of the chest, and I go, "Oh, God. This could be a heart attack. I could be dying." And I feel, real crummy. It's terrible living with yourself. You probably know this. You have to give a good sermon, right? And so, at any rate, I thought, I'm afraid to die. What am I afraid of in death? And you know what I figured out that I'm afraid of? That the Lord would say, "A good show, man. You put on a good show." Some of those people really thought you were sincere. They really thought you were what you said you were. But the curtain of death is rung down your little act now, so take off the uniform and give back the lines and wipe the makeup off your face. It's all over. And I thought, I think I am afraid of insincerity. What you have to do, two girls that play the guitar and sing at the Mass that I say for the students, came in one day, and they said, "Father, you know, some people think you're a hypocrite." And I got angry. And I could feel the anger boiling up in me. I said, "What does hypocrite mean?" I knew what they were going to say. And I was ready to plead guilty. "Well, it doesn't mean you don't practice what you preach." "Oh," I said, "I don't." You know, with St. Paul, you put yourself in with St. Paul, you can't go wrong. I said, "There's another law warring in my member. I see the right thing, I approve it, and I do the opposite." But there is another meaning of hypocrisy. And it means you don't mean what you say. And I do mean what I say, even though I'm not able to practice it fully. I like to be a loving person. So I was still angry. I crucified them against the sacristy wall, and I got my pound of flesh, and they went out. And I was still angry, and I thought, what was I angry about? And I thought, I'm going to sit up in my room and alone and think about what could I be angry about? And what I was angry about was not something in them. They said, "We don't think you're a hypocrite," but some people do. What I was angry about was that I am a hypocrite in the second sense. I don't think I really mean what I say. You know, when the chips are really down, when I get the pain in my chest after I give a great sermon on death, I'm afraid to die. I'm afraid of death. I remember asking an old priest who's dead now, "What is it like to be old? What does it feel like to be near death?" "Well, it's the way it's supposed to be." And I said, "No, it's the way it's supposed to be, but how do you feel about it?" And he said, "Well, death becomes more congenial as you become older." But at any rate, what I think you do is you look under your emotions for attitudes. Because there's always an attitude that causes the emotion. And you're very honest about it. You're very honest. To tell the people that I teach, what drives me crazy is when two people in my class are talking to each other. Now, I'm telling you that, but it's something in me. It's not something in those two people that are talking. What's in me? You know what's in me? I want to be a spellbinding teacher. I want to hold you, and I'm not holding you. And whenever I call on them, they always say, "He didn't get the word that you just said." And I go, "Oh, God." But at any rate, it is something in me, and I tell them that honestly. It really bothers me when two people do this. I want to be a spellbinding teacher. And you put it out as honestly as you can. You put yourself out as honestly as you can. You try to be authentic, but you know that there are other areas of your life in which you're not authentic. And maybe they're going to have to, like the girls in the sacristy, going to have to explode someday in rage or anger or fear or something. And then you realize, or the doctor's visit, you realize that I'm afraid of not being authentic. So I try to be as authentic as I can. I try to say what I mean and mean what I say, but I don't think it is not being authentic if you have contrary emotions towards someone, to tell them about those contrary emotions. You don't have to tell that person. You can treat that person as though you love that person. You can treat the little boy who gives you the Mona Lisa look, yeah, your name is Bill, and I'm sorry, I had the wrong handle. And you take the blame yourself, and then you tell someone else about the emotion. The emotion was real, but you had to look under the emotion to find out what was wrong inside you. What was inside you, and you try to put that out as honestly as you can. Does that help you with authenticity? Yeah. Any other questions, statements, testimonies, anything?
Father Paul, priests in Ireland, we people don't come up and tell us really what they feel about us, but here in America I'd hear it that people come up and say, well, Father, your sermon wasn't very good, or the priest might see the parishioners come up to all the other priests and getting him to do the weddings, and I'm overlooked, and you kind of feel, God, what's wrong with me, and hurt might come in. How does one cope with that?
How do I cope with it? I always feel uncomfortable with praise. I always feel that I've got to say that I don't understand that, but if you think that's fine. I mean, I can go along with that. But I don't take it in. There's something in me that is a strange thing. I feel little all the time. I feel small all the time. I apparently identify with the little boy that I once was. The Major League Baseball players, the guys whose parents I could be or grandparents I could be, I think they're the big guys. Woo! And one day we have graduation at Loyola, and I was coming down the aisle, and everybody turns and looks at you. And you know what I actually thought? I bet they're wondering how someone as young as I am could be on the faculty here at Loyola. And then I laughed, and I said, but I'm not young. I'm not even young looking. But somehow I identify with that little boy, and I try to tell people that I identify with the little boy, and I don't understand that. No one is more amazed than I am. But if you're impressed, if you like what I say, more power to you. I'm glad that God is using me that way. But that's what I feel like, that God has used me. But God could use a baboon if He wanted to. But God must be using me to reach you, and I thank Him for that. But that's about all I can say. Is I don't interiorize it in the same sense that it blows me up, it builds me up. But I'm kind of, it's like water off the duck's back. It feels good going down, but it rolls off. Any other questions, statements, testimonies, anything? Shall we dismiss them for lunch?